Wow. So this is what you would see in a view.
That's from flying view, yes.
Wow.
That's...
How's it going, everybody? So you might recognize this aircraft. It's known as a Boeing B17. And this particular aircraft is owned by the Commemorative Air Force in Arizona. They're a world-class group of people. And I've spent the last 3 days getting to know this particular airframe and the crew that essentially keeps it flying. They're right now currently on a US tour. They're essentially flying this airplane and that plane all over the United States, educating the public on these amazing aircraft and the history behind it. B-17s have always been kind of a big, fascinating aircraft since, well, childhood. I got a 50 caliber shell I got when I was 8 years old, when I saw my very first B-17. So these have always kind of been close to my heart, as I would say. I had a chance to fly one of these from here all the way to Liberal, Kansas with the crew. And these past 3 days I've spent getting to know this particular one, which is known as Sentimental Journey, and the crew that's involved with this one. So I'm going to do a two-part video series. First part's going to be essentially involving the pilot, and the best way to put it is flight engineer, mechanic, the guy that essentially keeps this thing together and in one piece. And we're going to be real technical about the aircraft. You might learn some stuff that you never knew about the B-17 and talk about the flight characteristics, power plant, and what it takes to essentially keep it in the air. And then the second video I call the pre-flight video. A lot of people think that you just hop in this thing, turn the keys, and go flying. There's a lot of pre-preparation to get this aircraft airworthy before you even take off, and we're going to get real in depth with that. So if you really like World War II, warbirds, and just everything aviation, or you never knew anything about a Boeing B-17, stay tuned for these two videos. And I'm going to post down in the link description linking the Commemorative Air Force, because truly they're a wonderful group of guys. And the volunteers and the whole team and everybody behind it, there's only 5 of these flying left in the world. And it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So, to me, that's a very big part of history. This was a very large contributing factor on why Germany didn't win World War II. And the amount of lives that, well, the war cost, and how dangerous this job was flying and being a crew member of the B-17 is truly nothing that we will experience ever in our lifetimes. The men that were a part of these aircraft, the ground crew, the air crew, the gunners, pilots, navigator, bombardier, is a whole team. And it's still to this day fascinates me how well they worked with each other. Also, if you didn't know how tough the B-17 was. I mean, there's photos of these aircraft coming back with half the rear rudder missing, half the elevator missing, half the wing missing. 3 engines are dead. They only had 1 good engine. Like, this was truly a tough engine. And I'll go in depth with that with the crew and talking about that. So, end of the day, enjoy this video. And if you like old warbirds and you want more of this, let me know. Post down in the comment section. But these guys really do put on a wonderful, wonderful program. And check their schedule. Maybe they're coming to your town, and if they're not, hop in the car, do a road trip, because believe me, it's worth it. You can actually fly on one of these. And I had a chance to ride along with these guys and experience the back area of the B-17 and what it's like. And it's like a symphony of music, hearing those 4 radial engines roaring and the smell of avgas and just everything about it. So for me, it's a surreal experience, and it felt good to get back in a Boeing B-17. And well, enjoy the video, and I hope to see this plane again, and maybe I'll do a feature on the B-25.
Co-pilot.
Co-pilot? And you...
Flight crew chief.
Flight crew chief. So
Like
you're...
a flight engineer.
And how long have you guys been flying and working on airplanes?
Flying airplanes? Wow. 60 years.
60 years.
No, it can't be. No. 80. 40 years.
40 years.
Yeah.
40 years.
And you've been in it since...
In this, probably about 64 years or something like that.
So you've been around, you both have been around airplanes a long time.
A long time.
Yes.
And this is your bird right now. You've been flying this across America.
Yep.
Yes.
And what year is this B-17?
1944.
1944.
Yeah, November of 44 is when it was made.
And how many of these are still flying?
About 4.
4.
Yeah, are actually flying this time. Yeah.
And this was a primary bomber in World War II. And there essentially was, their objective was it long-range missions?
Yeah, it was the backbone of the 8th Air Force based in England to bomb all of Germany. And they flew in the Pacific as well, but most of them were from England trying to destroy the methods of making war for the Germans. They didn't want to kill the people. They just wanted to blow up their trains, blow up the ball bearing plants, blow up their fuel supplies, blow up airplane factories. That way they can make more airplanes to fight.
That makes sense. And
It was the daytime bomber of the Allied during the war in Europe, mostly in Europe. Like George said, some operational activities in the Pacific, but now, it and the B-24 were the mainstay until the B-29 came to the Pacific and took over the glory and the heavy lifting of the Pacific side.
so, I mean, now more technical wise, this is a 4-engine radial.
Yep.
And we'll walk over here. The essentially, what's the horsepower on this?
1,200 horsepower.
1,200 horsepower.
Yeah, 1,200 each per
Each.
engine. 9 cylinders was designed, built by Wright, like I said, 9 cylinders. Most of the engines of this type, the R1820, they are called. Most of them were made by Studebaker Car Company, and we have here this right now on the airplane. I think 3 that are Studebaker. Yeah.
And were these forced inducted? So they have a turbo.
They have a supercharger inside.
Okay.
That runs all the time, and we have a turbocharger.
And is that underneath right
Yes.
over here?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll go check that out. And when you say this is an 1820, is it 1,820 cubic inches?
So yes, the Americans they designated all the engines in accordance with the cubic inches.
Wow.
So the R2800 has 2,800 cubic inches.
That's a big engine.
2,800, yes, but this one is 1820.
1820.
Yep.
And this, wow, that has got to be the biggest. Is this move?
That's the turbine wheel,
And that is spinning
and it's spinning.
when it's running.
Yeah.
Wow. And on one engine, what would you say the burn rate is in cruise flight?
Well, we plan 200 gallons an hour, so it would be 50 gallons an hour.
Per engine.
Per engine.
And this will burn all 4 at 200 gallons an hour.
Yeah, and now you're talking, that's gas, but there's also oil involved, and it burns 1 to 2 gallons an hour of oil.
Of oil.
Yeah.
That's why it holds 37 gallons of oil.
Per engine?
Per engine.
Yeah.
And I mean, the size of these tires. What does this aircraft weigh? I mean, what did it weigh? Let's say perspective-wise, fully loaded with bombs.
This one, the empty weight of this one is 36,000 pounds.
And the max takeoff is 50,000.
50,000 pounds.
And in the war, they pushed everything harder, further, faster.
They could have gone all the way. I think maximum overweight takeoff was about 70-something thousand, maybe, or something like that. That was yeah.
That's
But
incredible.
they never flew rarely they flew like that. Usually they carried about 8,000 pounds of bombs.
Yeah.
And the rest was fuel because they had to go far. So
And this have a drum brake system, or is it?
it has 2 brakes.
Two brakes.
Two drums. This is one side, and there is exactly the same on the other side.
My God, this
So
tire
it
is.
has two drums and two brake units. This is the brake unit, and this is the brake line.
And this propeller system on this engine, is it a variable pitch?
Yeah.
Or is it
Yeah, constant speed, full feathering.
full feathering?
Yeah.
Wow. Now, I mean, how long have you been flying the B-17?
I've been flying it for 3 years.
3 years.
Yes.
And what was the learning curve? to start? I mean, obviously you've been flying for a long time, but when they say, hey, I'm going to fly B-17, how do you learn? Is there...
Get in and take off.
Wow. I like that mentality. And the wingspan of this, what is the total wingspan?
104 feet.
104 feet.
Yep.
And height?
Well, I don't know exactly. I'm always worried only the wingspan.
About smacking stuff?
No.
No.
If I have to go and hide the airplane because a hailstorm is coming or tornado, I'm looking for a hangar.
That would...
So I have to know that the span of the doors is at least 105 feet.
105 feet.
So I can get the airplane in.
That is amazing. So yeah, let's walk around right over here once.
Yeah,
The bath of oil.
Yes.
37. I cannot get over 37 gallons per engine.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, this in wartime. How many? The gun system on this? They were using what? Barrett 50 cal or
Browning.
Browning 50 cal.
Yeah.
And how many gun systems were there on this?
Well, there's 13 guns, but systems, I mean, there's 2 guns here, but that's one system. So there's 2, 3, 4, 2 on the ball turret, 6, 2 in the back, 8,
No, I'm just claustrophobic. I can't do it.
1 on each side of the fuselage, 10, and then 2 up on the upper turret, and then there's 1 in the radio room that you take the sunroof off, and you slide 1 out for that.
Wow.
So there's actually 13. So, you know, quiz would be, how many guns? Well, you count all the visible guns, there's 12. But the 13th one slides down a rail and pops up.
I did not know that. Now, you know, this is essentially a giant tail dragger.
Yes.
And, you know, a common question is asked, well, yeah, you can ground loop. The common question is that this is obviously a tailwheel airplane, but with it being so big, is it more possible to ground loop this versus a traditional, like you fly a Stearman commonly?
Yes.
I mean, would you say the characteristics of this is easier to spin, or?
I think it's harder to ground loop, but there's more mass.
Okay.
So once it gets going, it's a lot harder to stop.
It's a lot harder to stop.
momentum.
Wow.
And so the Stearman is quick and twitchy, where this, it's big and long and slow, but once you get going at too high a rate of turning, it'd be a lot harder to stop.
A lot harder to stop. And have you ever had a situation where you're coming in and it felt like it was close to that envelope?
Luckily not.
Luckily, that's probably a good thing.
Yes, I don't want to go there to find out.
Yeah, I don't blame you one bit. And so, I mean, you've been working on these engines, this radial engine. Do you like working on the B17 in comparison to?
I love to work on it. It's technically it's pretty simple airplane. It's an electric airplane, which means that the landing gear flaps are electrically actuated.
No hydraulics there, huh?
Very little hydraulic. The only thing that is hydraulic are the brakes and the cowl flaps.
Wow.
So that's all the hydraulics you have. So you don't have really much of a hydraulic system to worry about. The rest is all electric, and so it's pretty simple. And structurally also, it's a very simply made airplane.
Unbelievable.
So working on it is not very difficult. However, you know, there are excess issues because we're, you know, for mature people. Because
Like, not as skinny as you.
it was designed to be maintained by young skinny people.
I get that.
So there are some areas that you kind of to get to.
I get that. Yeah. We'll walk around right over this way, and we'll transition to the back.
It's like to show when you look at some of the flight jackets of the era, most of them are size 36, 38 chest, not 42, 44 extra large.
They were tiny, weren't they?
Yeah, they were all tiny because everybody was 19 years old, skinny as a rail.
You can see here, it says on the side, that's an actual stencil. Crew weight. The crew weight, 1,200 pounds. And that's for 10 people.
That was the crew weight.
Yeah.
My God.
You know, so imagine that, you know, 10 people, 1,200 pounds. Yes, that's about one of my legs.
That's perfect. I mean, So all right. Another question is, what about getting parts for this? Are they mostly fabricated on your own? Like you're on your own to get parts?
We look for parts all the time. All the time. And sometimes we discover somebody in a farm in Kansas that has stock of some things, and we send a truck and get everything we can.
And he'll have like a stock of B17 parts.
Yeah, and all the B17 operators, we belong to a combine. We have like an organization. It's not an official organization, but so we exchange information all the time, and we share a lot of parts, information, knowledge. So we manage. Wow. There are certain items of concern that we won't be able to get at a certain point in time. Like tires, for example, nobody makes new tires for it.
They don't.
It's all retreads, you know.
So you're taking the existing tire and getting it retreaded.
Yeah, every year we have a contract with the Bridgestone tires. They have a mold, and all the B17 operators send their tires in January. Usually it's February, January, and we send all the tires to them, and they activate the production line, and they make tires for everybody. And but at a certain point in time, there's a limit how many times you can do that. And nobody makes new ones. So
what will happen?
I don't know. It's probably going to be after my time, but I don't know what's going to happen.
Maybe everybody will get together and say, okay, we'll pay for you to make a new.
Yeah.
That's probably what's
casing.
going to happen.
Yeah.
They'll have to put up the money, and somebody will make them. Because the other things is we always worry about is the rims for the wheels. Nobody makes them, so we kind of on the look out for. Other than that, it's basically very simple. It's supportable.
Now, on a more technical question, I've heard this. Were these self-sealing fuel tanks back in the? They were. And are there multiple tanks throughout the wing structure, or?
Yeah, there are 3 tanks in each wing.
3 tanks in each wing. And how many gallons will this hold total?
1,700.
1,700 gallons.
Yeah, maximum top is 1,700. And that's during the war. That's half of what they carried during the war. About half was of the tankage was removed because we don't need it. Just to carry the weight and the system, it was not needed.
It was 1,700 gallons. What was its theoretical range?
Well, that's our current 1,700 gallons.
Yeah.
So 200 gallons an hour divided by 7. That's 17.
About 8 hours, 9 hours.
Yeah, which is long enough for.
That's a sore butt.
Yeah.
It's about 1,000 miles.
Yeah.
Now, if we walk towards this way over here, back to the whole tail wheel question. You know, you were talking earlier that this tail wheel is not steerable.
Correct.
So it's a free castering, and on takeoff and landing, you said you lock it.
Yep.
Or okay. And so your initial turning ability of this aircraft is based on throttle input and brake input?
Yes.
Wow.
And our tail wheel retracts like it was originally. Some airplanes that fly nowadays, they don't. They just left them fixed.
And will this one still retract?
Oh yeah, sure.
Wow. With it, you say no hydraulic systems. So is there essentially one giant cable system that operates the elevator?
Oh yeah, if you go back in there, there's a sea of cables going down each side of the fuselage.
I mean, and is there a pulley system that alleviates some of the tension on the input? No.
It's no hydraulics, no servo tabs. It's direct cable input, very heavy on the controls.
So the controls are really heavy.
Yes.
So when these went into a dive, like trying to put an engine fire out, trying to get out of that dive had to been nightmarish.
Oh yeah. I mean, probably both of them would pull back at the same time. And I think during the war, there's no. It's fatiguing to fly over, especially in formation. So they would kind of swap out on the way to Europe and back. Okay, you fly for an hour or two, then I fly, because we're in formation, and that's exhausting. The weather, besides when if you're by yourself, you just go from here to there. But in formation, you have to stay next to the guy in front of you and not hit him.
Wow.
Yeah, they lost a lot of airplanes in mid-air collisions.
In mid-air collisions.
Yeah, when they tried to form up the formations over England,
Yeah.
they never made the missions. They collided and they crashed. A lot of good people were killed in the forming up. And it was very tricky, especially in the British weather, which sometimes was not very good.
So, I mean, they're like in formation in IFR conditions, weren't they?
It's tough. It's very, you know, and you try to find whom you have to form up on. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
you know, so yeah.
I read accounts where it's very poor visibility, and you're waiting for your turn to take off, and then you see this flash in the clouds, and you knew what just happened.
Whoa.
And then you still got in your position to take off, and you went,
And you went, even after seeing all
knowing
that.
what could happen to you.
Yeah, because somebody can run into you, you can run into somebody else. You never know.
So you have this whole elevator surface, and then the trim tab system.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can trimming this out, it'll fly pretty inherently
yeah.
straight.
Being a bombing platform,
Yeah.
it's very stable. So once you're in cruise and trim it out,
Yeah. Flies nice.
you can look around and everything's right where you left it because it's stable. It's very stable flying airplane.
Can you see the cable system on the inside?
In the fuselage. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I mean, this guy had one of the best seats in the house, huh?
Yeah, but it was this of all the gunners, this guy was in the worst place.
He was the most vulnerable, wasn't he?
Yeah, because they wanted to finish him off first, because he was very effective against the tail, you know, rear attacks. So they were after him.
Wow.
And,
And this is armor. Was this originally an armor plating?
no armor, nothing.
Nothing.
The only guy that had armor was the ball turret. So everybody thinks he's the worst guy.
Yeah.
He's the only guy with armor plating around him. These guys had aluminum.
Absolutely nothing to protect him.
Yeah.
No, nothing to protect them, nothing.
And he had a crawl. I mean, I've always wondered the accounts of when stuff was damaged. How did he ever get out?
There's that little door right there. I guess that's the door he used.
Oh, he could get out of it technically out there.
And
No, go ahead.
early in the war, the strategy was come up from behind, take him out, and then work their way up. Well, and so that's why before the G model, they didn't have a chin turret.
Mm-hmm.
And then later in the war, they switched. Instead of taking him out first, they came in head on and tried to take the pilots out. So then if you look at Memphis Belle,
Yeah.
it doesn't have a nose turret because it was an earlier model. And when they changed tactics, we go, oops, back to the drawing board. Let's put some 50s facing forward, so now we can shoot them coming head on. And so that's why that was an after fact or after add-on.
And they always had that top turret.
Yeah.
Okay.
In this tail, until this model, which was a G, even early Gs, they had what they had in the F. He didn't have a seat. He was on his knees. He was on his knees and operating the guns, kneeling on his knees.
On his knees.
Yeah, because this whole section was much smaller. Then they came up with this design, and they contracted United Airlines in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and all the B-17s from the production line would go to Cheyenne, and they would cut the fuselage and splice this tail on the airplane, and that's why to this day it's called the Cheyenne turret. This thing.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was a United Airlines maintenance facility that did that, and that made a huge improvement because the guy became much more efficient. You know, before he was on his knees and crawling and trying to maneuver the guns and everything else. Now it was he became much more efficient.
The later variants were much better, weren't they?
Oh yes, yeah.
Well, the difference between the B-17 started as B-17B, C, D, then there was E, F, G was the last one, the real one. There's the very little between the F and the G except for the turret. But they changed engines, they did some engines models, but the basic airplane was the same.
Wow.
The big difference was between the D and E when they put the big tail.
Oh, the fin. Yeah,
Yeah,
going
the
forward.
fin. Yeah, that was a big between the
So this fin variant was not present on the early ones?
No, the fin, no. On the early ones, there was a very little vertical fin, and you look at the pictures, they were much smaller. Then they put this sail.
It's big old
which is great for crosswind.
It's a lot of rudder authority,
Yeah.
huh?
Well, a lot of rudder authority, but also a big sail. So when you have a crosswind, it's pushing the back of that moment arm, and it says, "Okay, I want to go that way."
Yeah.
Wow.
Going to the wind.
Yeah, I want to weather vane into the wind.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Because if you look at the airplane, it's huge.
That's a big tail.
Well, part of it is because the airplane is pretty slow. You know, it's slower than the B-24, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like significantly slower, or what?
I don't know, but yeah, I think it's 24 is faster.
Well, we could do another video on 24s, but the saying goes, Boeing built this airplane for the cruise, and was it
Consolidated, yeah.
Consolidated built the B-24 for the Air Force, because they wanted an airplane that would go faster and carry more bombs than the B-17. That was the only requirement.
Yeah.
Give me an airplane that'll go faster, carry more bombs. So that's what they came up with, and it
Correct.
flew not so well.
I've heard that.
No, very, very twitchy airplane, and very difficult, much more difficult, not as stable. And the most critical part when you talk about maintainability and everything else, it was not survivable as the B-17. B-17, the structure of this airplane is such that it's built like we joke saying that the guy who designed the Brooklyn Bridge then went to work for Boeing and designed the B-17.
Because they're tough, aren't they?
They are built like and that's why they could take a lot of damage and come back. And the B-24, no way.
You'd see old photos back then where like
Yeah.
tail
Oh, yeah.
section's missing, the whole front nose is missing.
Yeah, the tail sliced, all kinds of things, you know. Yeah.
And
Wow.
there's a lot to that as far as the simplicity of design, no hydraulics. The B-24, you can get into the wing design. It was a hybrid between this slow, high-lift wing and the P-51 Mustang. And it was an experiment, and there's a very small margin of speed to keep your airspeed. And if you lost an engine, you could not maintain that speed. It's like a float plane in the water. When you start out, you're dragging through the water, then you get up on the plane, and then you can skim on top of the water and take off. Well, the B-24, there was a small window of, they call it a pocket in the curve, that you had to almost dive to get that speed, and then you can level off and stay in it. But once you lost an engine, they couldn't maintain that, and then all of a sudden, you'd be like, whoa, and they drop out of formation.
They'd be losing out even when they lose an engine.
Yes, and all their systems were in the center of the wing root airplane. You know, so you get one hit there, and you're taking out all your hydraulics, pneumatics, everything.
Yeah.
So they weren't able to take much damage at all.
Wow. So this was a much tougher plane.
Oh
Much tougher.
That's why the saying goes, it was built for the pilot, because you can take all kinds of damage and get home. B-24, you get one shot. Oops, we're going down.
Unbelievable.
And it's jettisonable. You can jettison it in flight.
So that can just drop out.
Yeah,
mid-flight.
they can drop it, and they did it, especially if they had lost engine or two engines and stuff. They wanted to make the airplane lighter. They would just drop it. There are a few bolts, and they had a kit to do it, and they would drop the whole thing.
Wow.
However, they better do it without a guy inside. And there were instances in which they did it with a guy inside.
They jettisoned
In
it.
order to save the crew and the airplane, they just basically, one guy was like, especially if he was hurt or killed inside, they just drop it
With the guy still in there.
Yeah. And there are stories that if the guy was small enough, he could manage to have a little parachute with him, because they didn't have the parachute inside.
The Baltimore guy didn't have parachute.
No. Because you see, to get in, you see this door? This
Yeah.
is the hatch, the only hatch. On takeoffs and landings, they were forbidden to be inside. They were sitting inside the airplane with all the bodies. And then they would rotate the turret 90 degrees with the guns pointing down. Then the hatch would be inside the airplane. And he would get in, buckle himself in, and his buddies would close the hatch over him. And then he would rotate and go into position. Basically lying down here, like this, with his legs up here. Yeah, like this, you see?
Wow.
And
That's a good
so in this this space to have a parachute as well was just about impossible. But some people said that some of them managed to do it, and then they could go and fall off.
So he'd crawl in topside like this,
Right.
and then they'd flip him over.
Yeah, he would go. No,
Okay.
he would go in when the guns are like this, like this, pointing straight down, and the hatch is here. See, the hatch. This is the hatch.
I see. So
This would be inside the airplane. Yeah.
Okay, so that's how this
Yeah.
looks right now.
Wow.
So that's the ball turret.
Not the most sought after position, was it?
No.
No.
And if the airplane lands on its belly, it would break the structure right on top there. And, yeah, it would cause a lot of damage. Wow. The airplane.
You got to look in there because there's just to show the lack of creature comfort and what these boys were asked to do. So he sits on that seat there. His back is there, and he's curled up, and his head is about here. Here's the gun sight. Here's the controls, machine gun buttons here, and points, and then up and down for the turrets to rotate, and side to side for it to go sideways. And then imagine sitting in this enclosed ball with two 50 caliber machine guns right outside your ear.
Right at your head. God, it's crazy.
Yeah, and then see those red stirrups up there?
Yeah.
That's where their heels went.
Your heels will go right there.
Yeah, so your heels will be up like that. So that's how you sat in this thing.
And they would be in this for hours on end.
Over enemy territory. Across the channel, they wouldn't be in there, but before they got to enemy territory, then they rotate the ball, get him in, seal him in, and then he'd be in there for the rest of the time over enemy territory, which could be hours. Hours. Wow. You can see the gun sight right there.
Oh yeah, you can. Wow. And did they have an ammunition count on this, or did he just fire when he ran out?
No, he has boxes up in the fuselage.
Oh, he does.
But everybody was only limited to so much. You couldn't sit there and just hold them down.
Yeah.
You had to be very conscious of how much you're shooting, or else you run out pretty quick.
Wow. That one right there.
Yeah.
And that came on the G and the F models?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So you look at pictures of Memphis Belle.
Yeah.
It's a smooth nose. And then after they changed the tactics, oh, we need to do something. How about let's put 250s facing forward, and they just.
And were the co-pilots and pilots control that, or who would control this gun system?
Who controls that? This machine gun. Who controls this machine gun?
Was it pilots?
Oh, is it the Bombardier?
No, this was operated by the Bombardier. You'll see there is a yoke with a like a control yoke up there inside the compartment, and it would operate it remotely from there.
Wow.
Yeah.
And the navigator, I guess, would do
jump
the
back
cheek
and
turret,
forth.
cheek
With
guns.
operating this.
Wow. Wow.
And of course, when they came in, they didn't have ladders like this. They would grip right here and do a stomach crunch, get your feet up here and climb in.
There was no ladder.
No, they would climb in that. That's how they would climb in. Because they're all 20 years old.
These cable systems.
Yeah, so the yokes are right. Here's the control, or the yoke connecting. So here's one yoke, and then there's the other right there. So those are all the cables that go to various
My
rudder,
gosh.
aileron.
And is there a redundancy if one cable were to break? Or do you just lose control inputs there? Like, let's say if one of these gets frayed and snapped, is there a redundancy?
Hey Jake, did they have cable redundancy? If one control cable broke, was there two cables?
Yeah, there are two sets going down the side of the airplane. There are two sets of cables.
There is.
So if one would be chopped, then they would have another set. Yeah.
Wow.
That's another reason why it was so survivable, the airplane, because of the two sets of cables running.
Because some aircraft didn't have that.
Most airplanes didn't.
So
No.
if they broke that. That was wow. Unbelievable. This is.
You gotta watch it. You bump your head on lots of things.
Wow.
Did you see the yoke there?
Yeah, down there.
Yeah, the yoke on the right with the two handles. That was for the guns.
That was for that front gun turret?
Yeah, that
Yep.
was for the turret. You see the one there?
Yes.
Yeah, that's how he operated it.
Wow, so what's this thing like to fly?
It's fun. It's a dream come true, but it's heavy and slow to respond. When you're lining up on final, if you get a little bit off, hopefully you have a long enough final because it takes a long time to get back to
Sure, this turning
be
on.
lined up. So you go, and then it'll go like that, and then you rotate back, and it just takes a long time to do anything.
Wow.
And flying from the right seat like I do, the trim wheel is one wheel on the left. There's no electric trim on your yoke.
So you have to reach over and...
Yeah, or like on landing, when you start putting flaps out, you have it trimmed for 120 knots level, but then when you put flaps out, you're straight arming it because it wants to just pitch up. And you do that because when you're flaring and you get full flaps and you get slow, then it neutralizes again, and then you can pull back to flare. Much time left, and you don't want to be reaching over and spinning trim wheels.
can you do a 3-point landing on this? Or
Oh, yeah.
wheels you can.
Actually, unlike most everything bigger than the steerman, which is a trainer,
Yeah.
everything above that you tend to wheel land.
Yeah.
And in this one, you can wheel land, but the way we're taught is either a tail low wheel landing or basically a 3-point. So you hold it off. Don't land, don't land, don't land, don't land. And that puts you in the 3-point attitude. So you 3-point this big monster.
That's incredible.
There are some people looking in.
Wow. So this is what you would see in a view.
That's from flying view, yes.
Wow. That's... So, and you're talking about the handle system.
Yeah, so for me, I grip it like this.
Okay.
And on landing, you have your thumb on the upwind engine. So if it's a left crosswind, so you can push the left engine up. And then this way you have to switch hands to push that one. But on a normal landing, so the top is engine 1, this is engine 2, here's 4, and this is 3. So 2 and 3 are on the underside, and 1 and 4 are on the top. So you sit there and synchronize the engines by doing like this. So it's kind of confusing at first, but that's the ingenious.
And when you taxi this, you're essentially using brake inputs, which are these upper parts right here.
Yes.
Okay.
And then normally you don't need both engines on one side. You just do the outboard engine on both sides to help. Like run up number 1, it'll help you turn right.
Wow.
And then here's the turbocharger system.
That's a turbocharger system.
Yeah. So
And you could base off, is it just like an internal wastegate?
well, it gives how much extra boost. So we normally take off, especially at this altitude, at turbo 8.
At turbo 8.
And that's as high as we go. I guess in the war you could go to 10, but back then if they blew an engine, they didn't care. They get maintenance, just pop another one on.
It's probably a bit more big deal now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't want to blow up too many engines.
And on your rotate speed, so let's say you're getting ready to take off on this runway right here. Mm-hmm. What are you aiming for on knots wise before you rotate?
So when I'm flying, the crew chief calls out 92 knots.
Okay.
And at 92 knots, I pull back. And you think something with 4 1,200 horsepower engines, you take off like a rocket ship. When you pull back and rotate, you actually do a very shallow climb.
Wow.
So you put the brakes on, and then pause the rate gear up, and then you accelerate to 122 knots, which is climb speed.
122 is climb speed.
Yeah.
So you're just watching that guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's only one. I don't have a set of instruments over here, so I'm flying looking over that way.
Wow.
And so you climb out at 122 knots.
And cruise speed. What is a good cruise speed on this?
Whopping 150.
Wow. I see why the missions were so long on these.
Oh yeah. And actually in this airplane you don't appreciate a lot of the other B-17s have crazed and cracked windows, but ours are in fantastic shape.
That's incredible. All right.
There's not everybody that can sit inside of a real B17.
That's flyable.
That's flyable.
Yeah. So, and let's say you're coming in on approach on this runway, and what is the stall speed of a B17? And B, what are you looking for a landing speed, your initial touchdown speed?
Well, stall speed is 92 knots.
Okay.
And so on downwind you're doing 120, and then on base 110, on final 105, and then you're bleeding off that speed so you hit 92 knots over the threshold right when you start to rotate.
Okay.
To flare. And the wing is such a big, fat wing that it has a lot of lift, and so it just floats, and so you just keep on pulling back, keeping the nose straight, and all of a sudden, you touch down.
So this likes to float, essentially.
Yeah.
And will you feel ground effect in this plane?
Yeah, if you come in too fast,
Yeah.
you're going a ways down the runway.
Wow.
So it helps to be on speed, or you have a long runway.
That is incredible. And
here's the gear. See, right now it's off, and then you push this out of the way to go up, and then gear down is just push down.
just like that.
But once it's down, then you have to turn the switch off.
You have to, because it'll keep.
Yeah, well, it's the electric, so it's a load on the generators. So you want to turn it off to shut that system off.
Wow. And on tailwheel airplanes, and in general, like on my plane, tailwheel has a lot of right rudder. Do you have a lot with this much rotating? Are the propellers spinning inward, or like on the P-38?
No, they're not counter-rotating.
They're not.
They all spin to the right.
So do you have this massive amount of torque?
Well, the technique for takeoff is you put the brakes on, line up, lock the tail wheel,
Okay.
this is the locks the tail wheel. This right now is a control lock, which is locked
This is your tail wheel lock.
That's the tail wheel lock that we lock and unlock as we taxi.
Okay.
So you taxi down on the runway, lock the tail wheel, hold the brakes, run the engines up to field baro, which here we'd run them up to 25 inches because that's our field barometric pressure at our altitude. You run up to 25 inches, wait for the turbos to spool up, then you release the brakes, and at the start of the takeoff roll, since you don't have a steerable tail wheel, the rudder isn't effective because you're not moving. So you steer down the runway with differential thrust or differential throttle until you get up above 60 knots when the rudder becomes effective, and then you go all the way up to set climb power or set takeoff power. You set takeoff power, and then now you're keeping it straight with rudder, and then when the crew chief calls 92, then you pull back.
Then you pull back. Wow.
So that's the takeoff technique.
Of a B-17.
Yes. Red ones?
Well, those are for your fire, right?
Well, that's the feather.
That's a feather.
You push those, and that feathers the propeller for each engine.
And this switches right here, this row.
These are the fuel shutoff valves that shut it off at the wing.
Okay.
And these are the boost pumps for the engines.
Okay.
So these have boost pumps. You keep them on it below 1,000 feet.
Okay.
In case engine-driven pump fails, you have an electric boost pump, which this is common in most any airplane nowadays.
Yeah.
And these are the fuel shutoffs at the wing.
Okay.
And then here's the bomb bay switch to open and close the bomb bay. And here's one of the two hydraulic systems, the cowl flaps. Open and close, and then you lock it to take the pressure off the system.
And your manifold for your mixture.
Yeah, and this airplane is backwards of just about anything else you're going to fly. Cutoff is normally back.
Yes.
Well, in this airplane, cutoff is forward. Auto rich is what we call it, is back.
Back.
So back here is rich, then there's auto lean, and then there's cutoff.
Out of all the aircraft that you've flown, do you enjoy flying this?
Yes, it's very satisfying to fly this piece of history.
Yeah.
Which, with only 4 in the world flying right now,
Yeah.
you're one of the lucky few.
Couldn't agree with you more on that one.